The first rule of compounding, never interrupt it unnecessarily. That's Charlie Munger. And he was talking about money. But here's what almost nobody realizes about that quote. He wasn't just talking about the money compounding. He was talking about you compounding. Your habits, your identity, your psychology. Because the money and the person grow on the same curve and they hit ignition at the same point. So let me describe a moment to you. You're sitting there one ordinary evening. You open your accounts, checking savings, the little investment account. Maybe you subtract the debt you still got and you add it all up. And the number says something it has never said before. $25,000 net worth positive. And here's the strange part. Nothing externally has changed. You're in the same apartment, same car, same job, same grocery store. 25 grand doesn't buy you a different life. It won't even buy you a new car outright in this economy. By every external measure, your life is identical to what it was at 24,000. But something internal just shifted quietly. And if you've ever crossed this threshold, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a feeling that arrives around $25,000 that did not exist at 5,000 or 10,000. A kind of steadiness. A quiet that wasn't there before. That feeling is not in your imagination. It is a documented, measurable psychological transition. And it sets off a chain of 5 specific changes in how your brain works, how you make decisions, how you see risk, how you see yourself, that compound into the single most important momentum shift of your early financial life. Today I'm going to show you all 5. What changes, why it changes, and how to use each one deliberately instead of letting it happen by accident. My name is Slime Johnson. This is Slime's Wealth Academy. Let's go. If you're someone grinding toward your first real financial milestone, watching the number crawl, wondering if any of this sacrifice is actually adding up to a different life, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you out. Because today we're talking about the threshold almost nobody puts on a thumbnail. Not the first million, not the first 100 grand. The first $25,000, the unsexy, overlooked, absolutely critical milestone where the psychology of money quietly flips from survival to momentum. So stay with me. Because understanding what happens here is what gets you through the hardest part of the entire journey. Part 1, the history lesson, the physics of ignition. To understand why $25,000 changes you, I need to take you back to 1772 to a Scottish engineer named James Watt. Now, Watt didn't invent the steam engine, that's a myth. Steam engines already existed. The problem was they were almost useless. The early Newcomen engine was so wildly inefficient, it could basically only be used to pump water out of the one coal mine it was sitting next to, because it burned so much fuel that moving it anywhere else made no economic sense. The engine produced power, but almost all of that power was immediately consumed just keeping the engine itself running. There was nothing left over to do useful work. Watt's breakthrough, refined through the 1770s, was the separate condenser. And what it did was simple but revolutionary. It dramatically reduced the energy the engine wasted on itself. Suddenly, far more of the power the engine produced was available for actual work. The engine crossed a threshold from produces power but consumes all of it just surviving to produces a surplus that can drive something else. That single shift from self-consuming to surplus producing is arguably what ignited the entire industrial revolution. Same fuels, same fire, same basic machine. But once the engine stopped burning everything just to keep itself alive, the leftover energy changed the world. Here's what most people don't realize. Your personal finances run on the exact same physics. Below a certain threshold, your financial engine is a Newcomen engine. You produce income, power, but almost all of it is immediately consumed just keeping the engine running. Rent, food, the car, the minimum payments, the emergency that wipes out the little you saved. Every dollar of power you generate gets burned just surviving. There's nothing left over. And critically, like that early steam engine stuck next to its coal mine, you can't go anywhere. You have no surplus to invest in moving forward. The first $25,000 of net worth is your separate condenser. It is the point where your financial engine stops consuming everything just to survive and starts producing a surplus. Not a huge one, but for the first time, there's energy left over after survival. And that surplus, small as it is what everything else compounds on. In 1776, Watt's business partner Matthew Boulton said to a visitor watching the engines run, "I sell here what all the world desires to have, power." That's what crossing $25,000 gives you. Not wealth, not yet, power, surplus. The leftover energy that finally lets the machine do more than just keep itself alive. Now let's look at exactly what that surplus does to you, starting with the data and the villain hiding inside it. Part 2. The data, the villain at the threshold. Okay, let's ground this in numbers, because I don't do feelings without math behind them. First, where does $25,000 actually put you? According to Federal Reserve data on household net worth, having a positive net worth of $25,000 puts a young adult, say under 35, meaningfully ahead of a large share of their peers. We've covered in previous videos that a substantial percentage of people in the 20s have a net worth at or near zero, and many are negative. So crossing into a solid positive $25,000 is not nothing. Statistically, you've already separated from the pack. But here's the villain. And this villain is sneaky because it's been with you the entire climb and you've never seen its face. The villain is what I call the survival tax, the measurable cognitive and financial cost of operating with no buffer, and the data on it is genuinely staggering. We talked about the Harvard and Princeton scarcity research in a previous video, but here's the part that matters for this specific threshold. The landmark study by Sendhil, Mullainathan, and Shafir found that operating under financial scarcity consumes mental bandwidth equivalent to losing about 13 IQ points. Think about that. Living with no financial buffer doesn't just stress you out, it measurably reduces the cognitive capacity you have available to make good decisions, including good financial decisions. Which means scarcity makes you worse with money, which keeps you in scarcity. The villain feeds itself. And it's not just mental, there's a hard financial cost too. We did a whole video on the poverty premium, the roughly $3,000 a year that the condition of having no money extracts through overdraft fees, payday loans, higher insurance, and the rest. Below the buffer threshold, you're paying the survival tax in both directions. Dumber decisions and higher costs simultaneously. Here's what most people don't realize. The number $25,000 isn't magic because of what it can buy. It's significant because it's roughly the point where, for a typical household, your net worth crosses from below the survival tax line to above it. It's enough to be a real emergency buffer, 3 to 6 months of expenses for many people, which is the exact thing that switches off the survival tax. And this is where it gets really interesting. The moment the survival tax switches off, you don't just stop losing the 13 IQ points and the $3,000 a year. You get them back. You get back the cognitive bandwidth. You get back the money that was leaking out. And you redirect both toward building instead of surviving. It's a double reversal. You stop the bleed and you reclaim the capacity at the exact same moment. That's the engine crossing the threshold. That's the separate condenser kicking in. And it triggers 5 specific changes. Let's go through all 5. Part 3, the 5 things that instantly change 1, your brain physically stops running emergency software. The first change is neurological, and it's the foundation for the other 4. Below the buffer threshold, your brain runs what I've called emergency software. The amygdala, your threat detection center, stays mildly activated by the constant low-grade danger of having no cushion. Cortisol, the stress hormone, runs elevated, and cortisol suppresses the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and complex decision making. So below the threshold, you are quite literally trying to plan for the future using a brain that's chemically optimized for surviving the next 48 hours. When you cross into a real buffer around $25,000, this measurably changes. The constant threat signal quits, cortisol drops, the prefrontal cortex comes back online. And here's the thing you'll actually feel. Decisions that used to feel impossibly stressful, a surprise bill, a car problem, a slow month, become merely annoying instead of catastrophic. The same event that would have triggered a spiral at $3,000 in the bank is a shrug at $25,000. How to use it deliberately. The instant you feel the shift, make your big financial decisions. This is the window where your brain is finally capable of long-term thinking. Set up the automatic investing, restructure the debt, make the plan. Do it now while the prefrontal cortex is online. Don't wait for motivation, because motivation is just this brain state and you're in it. Change 2, you stop spending to feel better and start spending to get ahead. The second change is about why you spend, and it flips completely. Here's what most people don't understand about irresponsible spending below the threshold. It's not a character flaw, it's medication. When you're under chronic financial stress, your brain is desperate for relief, and consumption is one of the fastest, cheapest dopamine hits available. The impulse buy, the takeout, the little treat, these aren't failures of disciplines. They're your nervous system trying to regulate itself under sustained pressure. When the survival tax switches off and the stress drops, the compulsion to spend for relief drops with it. This is the part people who've never crossed the threshold don't believe. A huge amount of what looked like a discipline problem just dissolves. Not because you white knuckled it, because the underlying stress that was driving it is gone. And then spending psychology inverts. Below the threshold, you spend to escape the present. Above it, you start spending to improve the future, the course, the better tires, the tool that helps you earn more. Same person. Completely different relationship with money. How to use it deliberately. Don't let the relief turn into a new, calmer form of lifestyle inflation. The danger here is real. You feel comfortable, so you upgrade. Instead, the moment the compulsive spending eases, capture that freed up money immediately. Automate it into investing before your lifestyle quietly expands to absorb it. Change 3. Your time horizon extends from days to decades. The third change is about when you think. There's a well-documented behavioral concept called temporal discounting, the human tendency to value immediate rewards far more than future ones. And here's the crucial part. Your rate of temporal discounting is not fixed, it changes based on your circumstances. Under scarcity, your discounting goes through the roof. The future becomes almost worthless because all your cognitive resources are locked onto right now. Survival mode literally cannot afford to think about next year. This is why below the threshold, retirement feels fake. Investing for 30 years from now feels absurd when you're not sure about 30 days from now. It's not that you are short sighted as a person, your circumstances mathematically forced a short time horizon on you. When you cross $25,000 and the buffer absorbs the short term threats, your time horizon physically extends. The future stops being an abstraction and starts being a place you can actually imagine arriving at. Compound interest suddenly makes emotional sense, not just mathematical sense. The 30-year chart stops looking like a fairy tale and starts looking like a plan. How to use it deliberately. This is the exact moment to set up your long term compounding machine because it's the first time you'll actually believe in it enough to leave it alone. Open the retirement account, automate the contributions, set it, and genuinely forget it. You're finally in the mental state to let a 30-year process run without panic interrupting it, which, as Munger told us, is the entire game. Change 4. Your relationship with risk completely recalibrates. The fourth change surprises people because it's the opposite of what you'd expect. You'd think having more money would make you more cautious, more afraid to lose what you've built. But the data shows the reverse. Once people cross into having a real buffer, they become more willing to take smart, calculated risks. The career move, the negotiation, the side business, the skill investment. Why? Because risk tolerance was never really about personality. It was about having a soft place to land. Below the threshold, every risk is potentially catastrophic because there's no cushion to absorb a failure. So you're forced into a defensive crouch. You can't negotiate hard because you can't afford to lose the job. You can't start the side thing because you can't afford the startup cost. You can't leave the bad situation because you can't survive the gap. The $25,000 buffer changes the math of every risk. A failure is no longer catastrophic, it's a setback you can absorb. And that single fact unlocks the kind of calculated risk taking that actually drives income growth. This is part of why building the buffer often precedes a jump in earning power. The buffer is what gives you the standing to go get it. How to use it deliberately. Once your buffer is solid, deliberately take one calculated risk you've been avoiding out of fear. Ask for the raise, apply for the better job, start the small thing. Not a reckless gamble, a calculated risk that the buffer now lets you survive if it doesn't work. The buffer is useless if you keep operating with the defensive crouch you needed before you had it. Change it 5. Your identity shifts from someone trying to someone who does. The fifth change is the most powerful because it's the one that makes all the others permanent. Below the threshold, your financial identity is provisional. You're trying to save, you're working on your money, you're getting your finances together. It's all aspirational, all in progress, all someday. An aspirational identity is fragile. It collapses the moment things get hard. When you cross $25,000 and actually hold it, something shifts in your self concept. You're no longer someone trying to build wealth. You're someone who has built some. You have evidence, proof you can do the thing. And there's a deep behavioral principle here documented in the work of researchers like James Clear and the broader behavioral science on habit and identity. The most durable behavior change isn't driven by goals, it's driven by identity. People act in accordance with who they believe they are. Once you genuinely believe, I'm someone who builds wealth, because you have $25,000 of proof, the behavior stop requiring willpower. Saving isn't a heroic act of discipline anymore. It's just what someone like you does. The investing, the smart decisions, the long term thinking, they become automatic because they're now expressions of identity rather than feats of effort. This is the change that makes the momentum self sustaining. The first $25,000 is brutally hard because you're fighting your circumstances, your brain chemistry, and an identity that doesn't yet believe. Everything after $25,000 gets progressively easier because now the money, the brain, and the identity are all pulling in the same direction. How to use it deliberately? Name it out loud to yourself. I'm someone who builds wealth. It sounds corny, do it anyway, because you're deliberately cementing the identity shift that the milestone just earned you. And then protect the identity fiercely. Do not rate the $25,000 for something that drops you back below the threshold because you're not just risking the dollars, you're risking the self concept that the dollars created. Part 4, the present day, how to actually get there and what it means now. All right, let me make this practical for exactly where we are right now. First, the path to $25,000 because knowing it changes you is useless if you don't reach it. If you're starting from zero and you can put away $700 a month, you hit $25,000 in about 3 years, even with modest returns. At $500 a month, around 4 years. At $350 a month, around 5 to 6. I know those numbers might sound like a lot when you're in the thick of it. But here's the reframe. You are not saving $25,000. You are buying your way out of the survival tax. the 13 IQ points, and the $3,000 a year. You're not just accumulating money, you're purchasing the brain state and the surplus that make everything after this easier. And here's a piece of genuinely good news about the present moment. The buffer portion of this, your emergency fund, can sit in a high yield savings account, currently paying 4.5% to 5%. That's the best cash environment in over a decade. So the safety money that switches off your survival tax is also earning real returns while it sits there doing its job. The two goals aren't in conflict right now, they're aligned. Now, the order of operations matters, so let me be specific. Step 1, build the emergency buffer first. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in a high yield savings account. This is the piece that does the psychological work. This is what switches off the survival tax. For most people, this is the bulk of that first $25,000. Step 2, while building it, capture any employer 401(k) match. That's free money and a guaranteed return you don't pass up even while building cash. Step 3, kill high interest debt aggressively. Because credit card debt at 24% is the survival tax in its purest form, actively dragging your net worth backward. Step 4, once the buffer is solid and high interest debt is handled, automate long-term investing into a diversified, low-cost portfolio and let the time horizon extension you just unlocked keep your hands off it. Now, a word on the broader environment, because this is a wealth channel and I won't pretend the backdrop doesn't matter. Valuations are elevated right now. The Schiller Cape ratio is sitting around 34 to 35 against a historical average near 17, which suggests forward stock returns over the next decade may run more modest than the historical average. But notice something. Almost none of what we talked about today depends on the market handing you 10% a year. The survival tax switching off, the brain coming back online, the identity shift, that's psychological and behavioral, and it happens regardless of what the market does next year. First $25,000 is the one stretch of the journey where your behavior matters far more than your returns. The market environment barely touches this part. Part 5, the honest take. No hype, no doom, let me be straight with you, because that's the deal on this channel. Everything I described today is real. The scarcity research, the cortisol mechanism, the identity science. But I want to be honest about a few things because overselling this helps nobody. First, $25,000 is a threshold, not a finish line, and the exact number is a generalization. For someone in a low cost of living area, the survival tax might switch off closer to $15,000. For someone in an expensive city with a family, it might be $40,000. The principle is what matters. There is a point where your net worth crosses from below the survival tax line to above it, and crossing it changes you. Find your number. It's roughly 3 to 6 months of your essential expenses. Second, I'm not telling you that crossing $25,000 magically solves your problems or that you'll feel like a different person overnight. For some people, the shift is dramatic. For others, it's subtle and gradual. And if you cross it and don't feel a lightning bolt, that doesn't mean you did it wrong. The psychological changes are real, but they are a tendency, not a guarantee, and they interact with everything else going on in your life. Third and most important, this is not a reason to feel bad if you're not there yet. If you're at zero or negative or clawing your way up from a genuinely hard situation, you are not behind as a person. You are below a threshold and thresholds get crossed. The entire point of understanding this is that the hardest part of the journey, the part before $25,000, where your own brain chemistry is working against you, is temporary and mechanical. It is not a verdict on your character, it's a stretch of road and it ends. The future is uncertain, nobody can promise you what the market does or what the economy does. But the behavioral truth underneath this is about as close to a sure thing as personal finance offers. Build the buffer, switch off the survival tax, and the version of you on the other side is genuinely better equipped, neurologically, behaviorally, and financially to build everything that comes next. Here's what I need you to carry out of this video. The first $25,000 is the single most misunderstood milestone in personal finance. Everyone's chasing the first 100 grand, the first million, the dramatic numbers that make good thumbnails. And they completely miss that the hardest and most transformative stretch is the quiet climb to $25,000. Because that's where the engine stops burning everything just to survive and finally starts producing a surplus. James Watt didn't change the world by building a more powerful engine. He changed it by stopping the engine from wasting all its power on itself. That's what crossing $25,000 does for you. Same income, same fire. But once your financial engine stops consuming everything just to keep you alive, the leftover energy, the surplus, the reclaimed bandwidth, the calmer brain, the extended time horizon, the recalibrated risk tolerance, the new identity, all of it compounds into momentum that carries you the rest of the way. 5 things change. Your brain stops running emergency software. You stop spending to cope and start spending to build. Your time horizon stretches from days to decades. Your relationship with risk recalibrates. And your identity shifts from someone trying to someone who does. You don't have to force any of them. They arrive on their own when you cross the threshold. Your only job is to recognize them, use them deliberately instead of accidentally, and protect the milestone that created them. So if you're not there yet, keep climbing. The hardest part is the part before the engine ignites, and that part is temporary. And if you just crossed it, pay attention. The quiet you're feeling isn't nothing. It's your separate condenser kicking in. It's the surplus arriving. It's the exact moment the whole machine changes. Build the buffer. Switch off the survival tax. And let the better version of you take it from there. If this video reframed what that first milestone actually means, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people grinding through the hardest part of the climb. Subscribe to Slime's Wealth Academy if you're not already here. We break down the real mechanics of money every single week. No jargon, no gatekeeping, no shame. Drop a comment. Where are you on the climb to $25,000? Just starting? Almost there? Just crossed it and felt the shift? Tell me. I read every single one. And if you got someone in your life grinding toward their first real milestone and starting to doubt whether it's worth it, send them this video. Showing them that the hardest part is temporary and mechanical might be the thing that keeps them going. I'm Slime Johnson. This is Slime's Wealth Academy. Regular people, real wealth, no gatekeeping. See you in the next one.